Hi guys, welcome again. In this video I will create a REST API in API gateway with Lambda backend and DynamoDB as the database. We will create a API to insert record into DynamoDB table using AWS API gateway. So without any further ado, let's get started. So in this video we will be doing the following things. We will create a REST API in API gateway with Lambda backend, and we will be using DynamoDB as our database. So we will create the API with resource/insert user, through which we will insert record into DynamoDB. The API will take following query parameters: user ID, username and age. So let us get started with the AWS console. Let me open my AWS console now. So I am in my AWS console. So first of all, let us create the DynamoDB database. We will create a new table. Let us name this table as users_db. Now we need to provide a partition key here. So let us name it user ID. So partition key is part of table's primary key. So it is basically a primary key which uniquely identifies each item in the table so that no two items can have the same key. And then we have this sort key which is optional, so we are not going to give the sort key in this video. If we provide the sort key, primary partition key and sort key together becomes a composite primary key. So composite primary key is a type of key which is composed of two attributes. First attribute is partition key and the sort key. So leave this empty for this video and create table. So DynamoDB table is being created. So let us now create the Lambda function which will be our backend for our REST API. Let us name it REST API backend. So now we have created our Lambda function. So in this diagram, as we see, the Lambda function will be inserting the record into DynamoDB table. So Lambda function should have permission to access the DynamoDB table. So we need to provide permission to the Lambda function to access the DynamoDB table. So we need to modify the role that is created with the Lambda. So now our Lambda function is created. Go to configuration, and in the configuration we see an execution role has been created for this Lambda. So go to this execution role. Now we need to provide permission to this Lambda function to access DynamoDB table. So go to add permissions and attach policy. So we are going to give Amazon DynamoDB full access to this Lambda function. So now our Lambda function has full access to DynamoDB table. Now next step is we will create our REST API. So go to API gateway. We are going to create a new REST API. So let us name it user management. Now we need to create a resource and method for this API. I have made another video in this playlist about resources and methods, where I have explained what is a resource and what is a method, and other details about these configurations. You can view that video. I will provide a link in the description box for that video. So let us now create our first resource for this API, and we would name it insert user. Create resource. Now create a method for this resource. Let us select post, and integration type will be Lambda. So we need to provide Lambda function ARN. Now here we can see there are two kind of integrations, Lambda integrations, Lambda proxy integration and non-proxy integration. So by default here non-proxy integration is selected. This is disabled, which means the Lambda non-proxy integration is selected here. So what is proxy and what is non-proxy integration? In the proxy integration, whenever a client submits an API request, API gateway passes the request as is to the backend Lambda function, which means request parameters like headers, query strings or other path parameters are passed to the Lambda function as is. But in this demo we are going to use non-proxy integration, so we will keep it as it is. So in non-proxy integration we have to define mapping templates. So we will see what are mapping templates. So let us first create the method. So now we have created our method here. So here you will see different things like method request, integration request, integration request, integration response, method response. So we will go to method request now and click edit. So we are going to add query parameters for our API. So first parameter will be user ID, which will be the required parameter. Then username required, age required. Now in the request validator we need to select validate body, query string parameters and headers, and save. Now as we had selected non-proxy integration for our Lambda function, so we need to also configure mapping templates, which is mandatory in the case of non-proxy integration. So here go to mapping templates, add mapping template. With non-proxy integration we must make sure that the input to the backend is provided as the integration request. You must map query string parameters into the proper integration request body using this mapping template. So we are now going to add the mapping template. So we can transform our request query string parameters to JSON through this mapping template like this. So we will pass the user ID to backend Lambda function in this JSON. User ID, which we will get in the query string parameters, we need to specify here. Similarly, username, and age. And save. Invalid path request templates, there is some issue, let us see. Okay, we need to give content type application JSON. Okay, now after these configurations we need to deploy the API. Select a stage, we will create a new stage, dev, and deploy. I have created another video about what is a stage. You can check that video in this playlist. I will provide the link in the description box. So now we have created our API. Let us now test this API. So if you go to the stages and select this post method, you will get the invoke URL for your API. So copy this invoke URL and let us create a new request in Postman. So this is a post request. Select post. And so as you can see, we got error missing required request parameters, user ID, age and username, because we had clicked that these are required parameters in our setting. So provide these parameters: user ID, let us say 1, username Tom, age let us say 20. Let us try again. So now we got the response back from our backend Lambda function, which is the default response, hello from Lambda. So if we see the Lambda function, we got this response. It means that our API worked fine. Now we need to write code to insert the data that we are passing through Postman to DynamoDB. Let me copy the code here. I have this code already written in Python. I will provide a link to the GitHub repo where you can find this code. So in this code, what we are doing is we are creating an object of DynamoDB in the Boto3 library, and we are providing the table name here, and we created an object of this DynamoDB table here, and using this object we are inserting the record into the DynamoDB table, and we get the data that we passed through REST API in the event object here. So you can see from the event object we are fetching the user ID, username and age that we had given in our mapping templates. So now let us deploy these changes and run our query again. So now our query should insert the data into DynamoDB database. So we got the message, data inserted successfully. Let us check whether the data is inserted or not. Another DynamoDB table. Explore. So you can see we have inserted the data into the DynamoDB table using our REST API which we created through API gateway. So in this video we saw how we can create a REST API and integrate it with Lambda function and DynamoDB as the backend. In the upcoming videos I will discuss another method of integration, which is the proxy integration. In this video we saw the non-proxy integration of Lambda function. So if you like the video, please hit the like button, add your comments or any feedback in the comment box, and if you have not already subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you.